Hey everyone, it's the 10-year anniversary of me writing this book, The Third Space. Well, it wasn't really one interaction, it was a series of interactions. And this ranged from talking to soldiers who were returning home after being deployed and how hard they said that transition back in normal life is. I observed this in athletes in terms of how they transition between different points, and the best athletes are able to move in a way from one point to another where they leave the previous one behind and get their mind ready for the next one. Also, something I talk about in the book and my keynotes is an interaction with a CEO where he literally had a different entrance into his home. And he would use that to reset himself and show up as a better version of himself. So I suppose it was a number of interactions rather than just one. Well, it was very different. I was married. We had one daughter, Isabella. We had a dog, Tilly. And I was doing about 130 keynotes a year. The concept really took off and became very popular, and it got booked a lot. So, I was traveling, and what I realized is that wasn't sustainable. I was loving presenting and the challenge of presenting, but it just wasn't a sustainable model for work-life balance. So that's when, after that book was released, we started to do more research and big project work where I could stay home more and be with my family. Well, Third Space was my third book. And so I'd written books before, and this one was probably one of the easiest, because if you look at the model of the third space, it's a very sequential model. You move from the first space to the different components, reflect, rest, reset, and then into the second space. So really how I wrote the book is just I went through the model and talked about what you've got to do at each stage in our research. And the earlier chapters were about the need for the concept and how important it is to transition effectively. So I suppose it was kind of an easier process than most. My latest book, Strive, was much harder because, it's about this big concept of the importance of struggle, and so it was less about a defined model that you have to walk through. So Third Space was a lot easier. The concept has obviously stayed the same, but what has evolved and changed a lot is the application, like the different contexts in which it works. So initially it was the transition from work to home was the most kind of pressing and popular transition. And then we started to think about more micro transitions, like how do you go from one meeting to another, or if you're a salesperson, how do you get rejected and then transition into the next opportunity and be your best? So where it's really evolved is applying it in different contexts. I mean, how it's made an impact on my life is, I just use it to try and show up the best I can for each interaction, whether it's walking through the door at the end of the day, whether it's meeting with a client, whether it's walking out on stage about to do a very challenging presentation. I mean, this is something I constantly apply. I think also, for staff, when I walk in the office, when I have interactions with them, I'm constantly asking myself that question, which is, how do you show up? God, so many. I remember one jumps into my mind. I was presenting in Phoenix, Arizona at a conference, and I presented the third space and a bit of other stuff around strive and challenge and struggle. And afterwards I was at the drink, and this guy who was at the conference came in, and obviously he was with his wife and his daughter, and they kind of rushed up to me, and the wife said to me, "Is this him?" And I'm like, "Oh God, what have I done now?" And the guy goes, yeah, this is him. And the mother and daughter just gave me a hug, and I was like, "Oh my God, what's going on?" And they told me the story that after he saw the presentation, they were at the hotel, and he went back to the hotel. And he walked in and just said, "Hey, I just watched this keynote, and I just want to apologize for how poorly I've shown up in so many days for so many years." And, he talked about how he brought the stress home, but they had to bear it. And they were crying when they were hugging me and just talking about what a realization he'd had and how he wants to work on it. And it was really, really moving. Scary at the start, but moving. Another one is a guy who meditated in his car. So he would drive home, but what he said is, I'd walk in the door and his wife, who was a professional, had a really senior role, she was on maternity leave, and he'd walk in the house and she'd kind of attack him for adult interaction because she's been with the kids all day and she just needed some sort of stimulation. But he said it just didn't give me a chance to leave my baggage at the door, and I'd kind of use the transition home to get over the day, but then she'd remind me of the day. And what he talked about was that he started parking a couple of streets away, and he'd recline the chair and listen to a meditation app before he'd go home so he could be more present. But what he didn't know is his wife often walked at that time, and she saw his car being parked out front of this random house, day after day, and she got very suspicious. Anyway, there was obviously fear of infidelity and those sorts of things, but it got sorted out pretty quick. And then they had a good conversation about how he could transition to the home more effectively. They're probably two of the ones that stand out to me the most.